Welcome back. All right. So I wanted to talk about a movie today, but for me to talk about that movie, I have to talk about two movies. Now, before you get into this, if you haven't seen Totally Killer, I would highly recommend it. It came out last year. I believe it's on Amazon Prime. If you haven't seen Time Cut, it's on Netflix. It's a thing. It exists. Go watch them and come back and watch this video. If you're not worried about spoilers and everything, by all means, stick around. You're still here? All right, let's go. So, Totally Killer came out last year, which is why it was so front of mind when I was watching this one. But I want to go through Totally Killer first. I don't think I did a review on this channel of Totally Killer, and I meant to. I've actually watched it twice. Because it's a horror movie, I watched it the first time to see whether or not I felt like my wife would enjoy it. Because horror movies can be kind of, a tricky thing to navigate with her, and sometimes they're kind of cruel and nasty, and she's not really all that interested. So the Saw movies, Hostel, those kind, no. So I needed to watch Totally Killer and make sure. And I was like, this is a really entertaining movie. So I watched it with her. And she enjoyed it too. Not as much as I did, admittedly, but she did enjoy it. So in Totally Killer, there's this Sweet 16 killer who had murdered a few friends of the main character's mother back in 1987. So her mother is very paranoid. She is turning 16, or I think she is 16 in the movie. Either way, the mother's very paranoid because they never caught the killer. And she's always concerned that there's the possibility that they could turn up, right? So the daughter goes out on Halloween, is like, "Oh, mom, you're crazy," and then the mom gets murdered. So she ends up, being attacked herself, and then ends up traveling back in time because the photo booth she's in is a time machine. And when a knife stabs that time machine, it activates and sends her back to 1987 before any of the violence takes place. So it is your standard setup. It's your standard Back to the Future, just with a slasher killer kind of idea. And this girl decides she's trying to save the lives of these teenage girls. This movie portrays the teenagers as being way too horny, which it's the 80s, so pretty accurate. And and it is really funny because now she's interacting with her parents. They're teenagers, and her mom, who is like this really sweet lady. And in the movie at the beginning, in present day, back in the 80s, not so much, kind of a potty mouth too, breaks all the rules, yells at her mother, and so the teenage daughter's left going, "Wow, and this is my mom." And so it was really entertaining watching this because there were some good moments. Like, she meets her dad, and her dad and her mom, and her mom and her dad originally didn't get together until college. So she lets it out that, well, you guys don't get together yet. And her mom's like, "I get together with him. I could do that." And so he hears that, "Yeah, I can do that." And so then they're all over each other. So she's trying to break them up. Everything short of getting a garden hose and spraying them with it. And it is funny. It is legitimately funny to watch. And yet there's still this peril that if she doesn't catch the killer, she's going to be stuck in the past forever. And obviously she doesn't want that, right? You don't want to be stuck in the past forever. Keep that in mind because we're going to come back to it when we talk about the other movie. So again, the time machine's in a photo booth, so eventually her friend has to try to build another one that's going to bring her back to the present. And eventually we do find out who the killer is. After a couple of whoopses, which lead to people dying, she does get it right. And so they find out that the killer was a person who was seeking revenge for the death of his girlfriend. That the mother from present day, who was a teenager in 1987, had been part of a group that had taunted this girl so badly that it kind of led to this girl's death. And so for the daughter, this is horrifying that her mother would be any part of that. Now they try to clean that up a bit, that the mother wasn't a ringleader and she didn't have necessarily an active, she wasn't one of the more guilty of the girls involved in this, but there was definitely some moments there. Now, then a second killer shows up. So they deal with the first, and there's a second. And that turns out to be a guy who's also used the time machine to come to the past when she did. And the one dodgy part is, okay, so how did she not see him when they went back to 1987? But at any rate, He shows up and he's used the time machine to get back to 1987. Nope, that's right. He used the time machine because he knocks out her friend to use the time machine to go back to 1987. And he's a nerdy guy who's got a podcast. He was a classmate of the main character's mother. So he's going back to up the body count. He figures this podcast will do better if he takes the body count and brings it up. And during the movie too, as things are changing, so as the main character is trying to prevent these murders, the articles change. So the articles of how these teenagers died change. And for the characters, they're like, that's not how I remember that. Oh my gosh, she's back in 1987 changing things. I thought that was really creative. So it's not like people disappearing out of a photo. It's not, oh, Biff runs the world now. It's just people going, that's weird. I remembered that being different. And, the whole Streisand effect, right? And that's been talked about with the Streisand effect, that you remember something happening that didn't. It did happen just in another universe, not in our reality. So there's that conversation as well. It's a deep conversation. Now, this movie has an 87% on Rotten Tomatoes. Rotten Tomatoes is flawed. Absolutely, yes. You want to call it flawed, you absolutely can. I'm not going to disagree with you at all. But that 80%'s earned, in my eyes. It's a really good movie. It's very entertaining, and I'm being as vague on it as possible while giving plot details because I want people to go and watch it. It is a very entertaining movie. Now, the other night, hockey's done early enough that I can watch a movie, so I picked the number one movie on Netflix, which was Time Cut. Why is it number one? We were very early in this movie, and I was already going, what? Like, and if I'm reacting with a what right early in a movie, that's not a good sign. If I'm pausing a movie and turning to my wife and going, I'm not sure I understand the character's motivation here, that's not a good sign either. And so the first issue I have with this movie is that this is about a sister who travels back to 2003. And she wasn't going to try to prevent any of the murders in the past that took place. Because Quinn, this guy she just met, goes, well, you don't want to mess with the timeline because that creates paradoxes. And she goes, all right. And she does, and I'm like, this is stupid. Why set up a character that you're sending her back to the past to try to save people and then, nah, you're right, I shouldn't bother. What? So the sister travels to 2003 and they make this big deal over how fashion's different and how people had Discmans. And I'm thinking, but fashion is different now than it was in 2003. So like, when they have the makeover scene where this girl puts on clothes from the early 2000s, it doesn't look that different than the way girls dress now. Like, fashion isn't like the 80s and 90s where everybody wore the same thing. And I love that about current society, that you can wear pretty much whatever you want. It really works for a guy who wears jerseys all the time. Just saying. And Disney stuff all the time. Again, just saying. So the sister travels back. Now, in the original timeline, which is not the original timeline. If you think about it, if you've watched the movie, that means this is not the original timeline. Her parents in present day are very depressed because their daughter passed 20 years prior. As a result, they went through IVF fertilization processes, and so this sister is born as a result. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had another kid. And that does come back in the story as the only part of the story where I'm like, that's creative. That right there. That's interesting and that's absolutely creative. And that's where the movie kind of frustrated me, that there was some creativity here, just not through a lot of it. So the time machine's in a barn and she just randomly walks over, like, so I guess it's the killer's time machine to go back in time and do away with these people. And so she just wanders into the barn because they were saying their respects to her sister, and she just, yeah, what is this? And pushes a button. So if you find a random weird looking machine in a barn that's just off on its own, are you pushing the button to activate said machine, not having an idea what it does? That was my first issue, because she's established as being really smart, that she's going to go work for NASA. My favorite part was when the parents are going, where? And I'm like, it's NASA. Does it matter where? Like, it's just there are things, and the parents are like, well, I don't know about NASA, and I'm like, really? Like, there's a parent out there that's gonna be like, I'm kind of disappointed you're gonna go work for NASA. That's, I mean, that's a government job, you're gonna get a pension, but still, NASA, why? Whatever. So they established that the parents are depressed still 20 years later because of losing a daughter. And I'm not saying that can't be a thing. I'm not saying it can't be, but it just came across as, and I understand too, it's the anniversary and all. It just, the whole thing seemed very, very melodramatic. One thing I noticed right away was, so this movie here, the acting is quite good. The acting in this movie, in Time Cut, comes across as melodramatic and almost soap opera level. So like Dynasty, Dallas, Falcon Crest. I'm showing my age, aren't I? So yeah, just it comes across as kind of hokey and a little bit over the top with the acting. Now, the Sweetly Slasher is the name of the killer here. Never found. It's the Sweet 16 killer in here. So Sweet's in both titles. If you're going to rip off this movie, make it different. Make it, and I understand that in this case it's a sister meeting her sister from the past, whereas in the previous one it was a mother meeting or daughter meeting her mother in the past. But since these sisters never met each other in real life, it doesn't matter. There's no emotional heft to that first time that the girl from the future meets her sister from the past. They kind of play it up like it's this big deal, but then nothing. And I was like, okay, so what's the sister gonna be like? She's fine. She's a little bit dingy, but she's a sweet girl. No problem. And the reason that the serial killer from the future uses to go back to the past is so far beyond stupid. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't. Because he's angry about things that happened in '03 and how his life didn't turn out very well after that. But I don't see how hurting these people made a difference. Not only that, but apparently the incident that caused all of his brain to stop functioning is that he gets thrown in the river by these bullies, which they show early on in the movie. These bullies trying to throw him in the river, and then girl from the future just comes over and lays the smackdown on the head bully, and that's it. They don't try to throw him in the river after that. Not only that, but he couldn't swim. So I was thinking, wait a minute. So looking back at it, so he couldn't swim, and initially in the original timeline, he's thrown into that river, and apparently the sister, who has been established as a pretty sweet girl, laughs the whole time at him being thrown in the river. But they're friends. So like I don't understand it. I don't understand it at all. A big thing for me with a movie is if a character's motivation doesn't make a lot of sense, I'm gonna have trouble watching the rest of the movie. So she pushes the button. She goes back to the past. She's not saving people though, because Quinn, this guy she just met, says no. She's like, all right, cool. We're just gonna sit around then and eat bubble gum and figure out how to send me back to 2024. And we're not going to try to prevent any killings because it's the butterfly effect. There's the all the paradoxes and whatnot, which it's tired. I think when you make a time travel movie now, you don't have to go into that part of it as much. You can kind of make that a throwaway line. Everybody watching these movies knows about the whole paradox thing and everything else, right? We've all watched Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. We understand. So the Sweetly Slasher turns out to be Quinn from the future. So in the original timeline, there is no Sweetly Slasher. He goes back in his time machine to the past, creates this Sweetly Slasher thing. 3 people are off. I think it's 3 or 4. And then he comes back to the present. Right? Like, and again, it doesn't make sense. So he comes back to the present. She uses the time machine to go back to the past, but see, she saw the light come on, so I guess he goes back to the past right before she does, but he can't have gone back to the past right before she did either, because it's already established at the start of the movie that her sister's dead. So, what? So, he went back to the past a second time and used the time machine to go back? And then she goes back the second time he goes back? Was he hankering for food that you had in 2003 we don't have now? What? Like think about this. The original timeline, the sister doesn't die. So, what was the start of the movie about if people are already dead? And if he's going back to the past later that day, the sister should have been there and then she should have disappeared. So, a better way to write this movie, and for anybody who was in on writing Time Cut, by all means follow along. You start the movie with two sisters, and one day, one sister's gone. Think of it like Men in Black 3, where all of a sudden he's gone, right? Uh, Tommy Lee Jones's character is gone, and I'm spacing on the name now. I want to say Jay, but Jay was Will Smith. K. K's gone. Nobody knows where K is. So he's got to go back to the past and save K, right? I'm going to say this also, Men in Black 3, my favorite of the Men in Black movies. I can watch that movie any day, as long as I have time, as long as there isn't hockey on. But I love Men in Black 3. I think it's a great movie. I like it so much more than 1 and 2. I think it's very creative. I think it's fun. I think it's creative. And the depth between J and K becomes so much more, I thought, in that third movie. It is a shame that it didn't get more money and more plaudits at the time, because I thought it was very well made. So you can make this movie work, but you have to start with both sisters and then have one sister wake up and the other one's not there. And then go downstairs and go, Mom, Dad, where's Celeste or whoever, right? And the parents go, that's not funny. That's not funny. And then, she goes upstairs. She's like, I don't know what's wrong with my parents. Goes into her sister's room and finds it's unchanged from 2003, which is the storyline in the movie. And she goes, wait, what? And then maybe there's an article, a clipping somewhere that talks about the Sweetly slasher. And you find out she died back in 2003. And the sister's like, how did this happen? And so you could introduce a couple of other characters with her that go, okay, so there's a timeline, and then you could have a whole nerdy multiverse discussion too. Because clearly this is creating a multiverse if the killer keeps going back and you have alternate timelines. But anyways, instead they went with the very stupid route where she just goes, button, oh, I'm in 2003. And she's so, oh my gosh. She comes out of the barn and the whole town fell apart after these murders. The whole town fell apart. And I understand a small town absolutely would have a hard time getting over losing teenagers. She goes back in time and everything is immaculate. And she's still like, I gotta go talk to my teacher. This is weird. She even looks at a sign and goes, why does it say 2003? You're in a time travel movie. And so then she goes and talks to a teacher who doesn't have a reaction at all to this strange girl coming in. He just assumes that got to be one of my kids. And they talk about time travel. It's like, all right. And people are really accepting in this movie of just, oh, time travel. Cool. Awesome. Great. I thought they handled it much better here. I did. I thought they handled it much better here. Very entertaining when the girl from the future has to tell her own mother in the past and does not at any point reveal that she's her daughter. At no point does she say, I'm your daughter, you're my mom. There's a couple times she slips and calls her mom and then she covers for it, and it's funny when she does. In this one, she's just like telling her sister, yeah, I'm your sister. And there's no big reaction. There isn't. And then a lot of the time, you either get an exposition dump, and I can't stand those, or stuff happens off screen. It's so stupid. It's so ridiculous. It like I watch hockey every night. It'd be like watch the first two periods of the game, writing down all the notes, and then for the third period just writing, yeah, the Capitals came back and won in overtime. Why go through all that and then just at the end? Because this is what happens. This is why it's got a 26% on Rotten Tomatoes, I would think, because it's not very well written. And it copies this. It's a bad copy of Totally Killer. Like, almost beat for beat. You watch these two, and I may at some point watch these two movies. And this is something I used to do with Friday the 13th. I watched the Friday the 13th movies, and I would timestamp everything that happens in the movies. and I went 1 through 6, and all the timestamps almost always matched up. And I realized every Friday the 13th movie didn't just follow a formula, it followed a timing of that formula where every movie at like 8 minutes this happens, 12 minutes this happens, 18. So if you watch Friday the 13th movies, you go, man, is this repetitive? You're not wrong. And in this one, it's very similar. Very, very similar. But in this one, every beat is stupid, and in this one, every beat makes sense. So you find out that the Sweetly killer is this nerdy friend, and when the nerdy friend sees the mask come off, and it's him from the future, the makeup's terrible. He just deepens his voice so he sounds more like a man. And I'm like, that's it. You just put a wig on him and you give him the manly voice, and then that's the manly grown-up version. Not only that, her parents at the start of the movie look exactly the same as they did in 2003. When she goes back in time, I was like, oh, it'll be interesting to see what her parents look like, and they look the same. So if they used any age-up makeup, it's not really noticeable. So either they're aging really well, or they aged poorly until 2003 and then stopped. So you guys can decide. But this guy went insane due to being rejected with bullying and decides to go back to 2003 and murder people? How does that improve his life now? Because at the time he goes back and starts offing people, he'd already been thrown in the river. And he wasn't targeting the people who threw him in the water. He wasn't targeting the bullies. He was targeting girls and people. And I'm like, but like, why? Why aren't you targeting the guy who picked you up to throw you in the water? Why aren't you targeting him? Nothing. And I knew it wasn't him. And they were setting him up as being the big fake out because they gave him the last name Myers. So as soon as I heard his last name was Myers, I was like, he's not the one, because you can't have a killer named Myers in a movie because it's not Halloween. I was so flabbergasted by every single decision the writers made. It just didn't make any sense. It did not make sense. They don't really explain how Quinn built a time machine. I'm like, oh, yeah, he can build a time machine. How? Not explain. Nothing. Just, well, it's a nuclear facility. Okay, that doesn't. Nuclear does nothing. That doesn't tell me. It might as well be a water treatment facility. That does not tell me. And from what I can tell, it's sort of like a Back to the Future 1.21 gigawatts thing. That gigawatts. And it doesn't matter. Why am I reliving this? Why do I do this to myself? It feels Flash-like, doesn't it? It's very Flash-like. This movie has no business being number one on Netflix. I'm just warning people. I'm telling people, go watch Totally Killer. This movie's fantastic. This movie is Citizen Kane compared to this one. Like, this wouldn't even be the Kane from Citizen Kane, and there is no Kane in Citizen Kane either, is there? But I just like, and even then, so she goes back to the future, 2024, and she's in a garage or in a parking lot with the killer, and I'm like, wait, but it's a time machine. It doesn't move through, like, from one place to another. It's just, it should be in the exact same. Why are they in a different place? I even asked Yvonne, I said, why are they in a different place? She's like, I don't know. And I'm like, okay. So, like, and so she kills him in 2024. And I'm like, okay, now she's a murderer, because there was no establishment of anybody catching Quinn. No, none. Zero. So now there's no reason for anybody to believe her. She's going to go to jail for the rest of her life. But the movie has a genius plot twist. Ugh. So the parents had IVF for the younger sister after the older sister dies, right? And so during the movie, she has a crisis of conscience. The only good part of the movie, the only good part is she realizes that if she saves her sister's life in the past, she doesn't exist. She will cease to exist because they don't have a reason to go through the IVF process to have a second child. So she is left stuck saying, do I want to save my sister, which essentially wipes me out of existence, or not? That crisis of conscience is like, it's a few minutes. we've already established that if this girl's told you probably shouldn't try to help people from being murdered, she won't. She's just gonna be like, all right, sounds good. They told me not to. Why didn't you stop him from with the axe? He told me not to stop him, so I swear, if at some point in time the guy behind the mask had gone, hey, stop it, she would have been like, he told me to stop. I have to leave. So dumb. So she goes to the future and offs the killer in the most anticlimactic scene that I can remember. And stupid. Oh my gosh. There were parts of that where I was like, he just jabbed his knife into a car charger? Did he not know how to avoid stabbing? Like, I know she's holding it up, but didn't he know to stop and just come around? And then, I mean, if I it would have been darker if I wrote it, she just would have died. So like, try to find the logic, and then she just goes back to '03. She just comes back in the time machine. There's a time machine in 2024. It's never dealt. It's still in the barn. So if you know where that barn is, by all means, go find it. You can go wherever you want, whenever you want. There's all kinds of ramifications of said time machine still being there, but who cares? Because she went back to 2003 and she said, I know this is where I belong. That she went to her house and her parents didn't recognize her, and she laughs about it. So she goes back to 2003, and guess what? She still gets an internship with NASA. Don't ask how. Some kind of essay on being a time traveler, and I'm like, what? So she's just going to stay in 2003. She's going to live from 2003 till 2024 all over again. The interesting part is there's all kinds of ramifications of that. That girl should be rich. She should be rich beyond her wildest dreams. She would know exactly which stocks to pick in 2003 to make her a ton of money. She would know exactly what to do to make a lot of money. And she's going to intern for NASA. Of course. Yep. All right then. Sure. She could. Where'd they get her grades from? That's 2003. Whatever. She doesn't exist. She doesn't have a social insurance number. Or social security number. Sorry, I'm Canadian. Social insurance number up here. She doesn't have a social security number. She doesn't exist. So did she Highlander it? Did she just find like somebody who passed away that isn't in that same right around range and steal their identity? 87%, 26%. Well acted, well plotted out, entertaining. A whole lot of pausing and saying, what in the hell is happening? Why would you do that? Like her sister decides, all right, I'm going to go to the party and guess I'm going to die. And I'm thinking, no. No. And the other problem I had with it was Quinn comes back from the future with an agenda. There are certain people on his list that he wants them gone. When they save one of the girls, he doesn't go after her again. It's as if he goes, well, missed that one. Oh, well. Like I am incredulous at just what how I'm incredulous. I don't know what to add to that other than that doesn't make sense. And I had that debate with Yvonne where I was like, nah, he wanted specific people. He's after specific people. Saving her and taking her home and going, well, good night. He's gonna know where she lives. He's gonna know where to find her. She's still gonna go. And then they split up. They're hunting for him and they split up. And I'm like, have they never seen a horror movie? Why are they splitting up? All of them are on his list now. So, well, other than the one. Quinn from the past. Which you can tell because he doesn't have the big manly voice. Big manly. I'm older Quinn now. I guess if I want to be older hockey guy. Actually, at this stage of my life, to be older hockey guy, I have to be like Grandpa Simpson when I talk. So, there you go. A movie that's well written, where at the end of it, the time machine is gone. A movie that is poorly written, where at the end of it, there's a girl living in the past that doesn't belong there. The time machine's still there, and people could be using it for any nefarious reasons. We'll never know. Oh God, they could make a sequel. Please don't watch the movie and give Netflix a reason to make a sequel. One of the most frustrating things with Netflix is that they keep canceling really good shows and they call off really good projects to put out crap. Time Cut. I have never seen a movie that to me feels more plagiarized than this. It really feels like they just took this plot line and went, hey, that's a pretty good plot line. And they changed it just enough so they wouldn't get sued. There were at least 3 times where I paused this movie to turn to my wife, who I'm sure I drove nuts while I watched this movie, and say, in the other movie, this happened. So in this movie, it happens a little bit different. So technically, it's not copying the other movie, but it is. And if this movie didn't consciously copy this one, they had to have watched this one. They had to have, or something, because oh my gosh, seriously, the acting, considering the subject matter, I actually thought was pretty good. The actors and actresses in this, the teenagers that were in it, pretty good. I don't think they were teenagers either, but given the subject matter, you can only do so much. There are some really famous actors and actresses who've been in really bad movies where they don't look like they're very good actors and actresses because the script is not great. And so I do not hold this movie against anybody who was in it. I'm not going to see them in another movie and go, oh, I'm turning this off because they're in it. But what a mess. What an absolute mess. And it's a shame because this movie is so well done. To me, this movie is so well done, and this one is not. So if I do a video list this upcoming summer on my favorite movies, favorite horror movies, Totally Killer will be on that list. It is very smartly written. Time Cut, even the name Time Cut. What a it's like Time Cop, but not. It's just like Totally Killer is a fun name for a movie, and the poster art for Totally Killer is really fun. Time Cut, it's just it's so weird. It'd be like, no, we didn't rip off Mickey Mouse. This is Mackie Moose, who just happens to have rabbit ears because he was born that way. It's a birth defect, and he laughs like Mickey, but more of a hoo instead of a haha. Like I just oh. So I had to share this with all you fine people on the internet today. You're welcome. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.